In the 1950s, the researchers who discovered cortisone were awarded the Nobel Prize in Medicine. It was hailed as an absolute medical miracle. But for the millions of people who rely on steroid replacement therapy today to stay alive, that miracle often feels like a trap. You look in the mirror and see a body overloaded with steroids, facial fullness, shifting weight, skin changes. But you feel so deeply, persistently exhausted that your bones ache. You are somehow overdosed and underdosed at the exact same time. We are diving into a really complex contradiction today. A recent article from My Adrenal Life brought this up, and it struck a chord with so many people living with adrenal insufficiency, like Addison's disease or secondary and iatrogenic forms. Where do we even begin to unpack this? Rachel, this is a topic that is so heavy for people dealing with primary adrenal insufficiency, like Addison's disease or secondary and iatrogenic forms. Where do we even begin to unpack this?
We have to start by looking at what steroid replacement is actually trying to do and why it fundamentally falls short. To understand that, we need to go back a bit. When Thomas Addison first described adrenal insufficiency in 1855, it was a universally fatal condition. You just died. It wasn't until the mid-20th century, right around the 1950s, when commercial hydrocortisone became available, that patients could actually survive. But that is the key word: survive. The medical protocols developed back then were designed to prevent death from adrenal crisis. They were never designed to perfectly replicate the microscopic, second-by-second physiological adjustments of a healthy endocrine system.
So the baseline expectation from the medical establishment has historically been that as long as the patient is alive, the drug is working. But the lived experience of the patient is entirely different. They take their hydrocortisone or prednisone and they start developing cushion-laid features. Their face gets round, they gain weight in their midsection, which are classic signs of too much cortisol. So a doctor looks at them and says their dose is too high. But the patient is sitting there saying they can barely walk up the stairs, their brain is in a fog, and they feel like they're in a crisis. How is it biologically possible for both of those things to be true?
It comes down to the difference between circulating blood levels of a hormone and tissue level utilization. A great analogy from the My Adrenal Life article compares cortisol to electricity in a house. The pill you swallow is the power coming into the main breaker. Your blood test is the reading on the meter. But what actually matters is whether the lights turn on in every individual room. You could have a power surge blowing out the bulbs in the kitchen while the bedroom is completely pitch black.
That makes a lot of sense visually, but what is the biological equivalent of those individual rooms? Why does the face or the abdomen get the power surge, so to speak, while the brain or the muscles are left in the dark?
It is all about localized enzymes and receptors. According to research published in the journal Endocrine Reviews, there is an enzyme called 11-beta-hydroxysteroid dehydrogenase type 1, or 11-beta-HSD1 for short. This enzyme acts as a local gatekeeper in your tissues. Its job is to convert inactive cortisone into active cortisol right there inside the specific tissue, like your liver or your fat cells or your brain. But this enzyme does not operate uniformly across the entire body. Furthermore, the Endocrine Society notes that there is significant genetic variability in glucocorticoid receptors. Some people have receptors that are highly sensitive, and others are resistant. So your fat tissues might be hypersensitive to the steroids, soaking them up and causing weight gain and facial fullness, while your muscle tissues or neurological pathways are resistant, leaving you feeling profoundly fatigued and under-replaced.
That is wild. So you literally have different organs experiencing different realities. The fat cells think there's a cortisol flood, and the brain thinks there's a drought. But when a patient goes to their endocrinologist, the doctor usually just pulls a blood test. They look at a serum cortisol level or an ACTH reading. Are those tests completely useless then?
They aren't useless, but they are dramatically incomplete. Guidelines from organizations like the National Institute of Diabetes and Digestive and Kidney Diseases explain that blood tests measure what is floating in the bloodstream at that exact second. They do not tell you what is happening inside the cell. When a doctor relies exclusively on a blood test, they're looking at the delivery truck on the highway, not checking to see if the package was actually opened at the house. This is where the friction happens between doctors and patients.
And that friction is exactly what leads to the medical gaslighting. We hear this term a lot now. A patient goes in, they feel terrible, they describe symptoms of low cortisol, but the doctor looks at their puffy face and their normal lab work and dismisses them. They get told it is just anxiety, or maybe they need to change their diet. That has to be incredibly damaging.
It is devastating. Studies on the sociology of chronic illness show that when patients experience this kind of dismissal, it leads to a profound loss of trust in the medical system, and even worse, a loss of trust in their own bodies. Medical gaslighting in adrenal insufficiency usually isn't malicious. It stems from a gap in clinical education. Endocrinologists are trained to look for patterns. Too much steroid equals Cushing syndrome. Too little equals Addison's disease. They're taught these are binary opposites, but clinical comparisons by nursing and endocrine organizations point out that the symptoms of cortisol excess and deficiency actually overlap significantly. Both cause profound fatigue, both cause mood instability, both cause muscle weakness.
So if the doctor is stuck in a binary mindset and the labs look normal, the patient gets dismissed. How does a patient break through that wall? Let's get really practical here. If I am a patient experiencing this simultaneous toxicity and insufficiency, how do I walk into my endocrinologist's office and communicate this without sounding like I've just been reading medical forums all night?
The first step is shifting the conversation away from feelings and toward functional data. Doctors speak the language of data. If you walk in and say that you feel tired and your dose feels wrong, that is too vague. You need to provide a highly structured symptom log. Track your blood pressure, your heart rate, your body temperature, and your functional capacity at specific times of the day, correlated exactly with when you take your steroid doses.
So instead of saying you are exhausted, you say that at 2 p.m., 3 hours after your hydrocortisone dose, your blood pressure drops to 90/60. You experience cognitive impairment and you have to lie down. That paints a clinical picture.
Exactly. You are providing objective signs of under-replacement. Then you address the elephant in the room. You say that you know you have outward signs of over-replacement, like the facial fullness or the weight gain, but your functional data shows you are under-replaced. You can explicitly mention tissue-specific metabolism. You don't have to give a biology lecture, but saying something like, you've been reading literature from the Endocrine Society about how tissue-level cortisol absorption doesn't always match circulating blood levels, and you suspect that is what is happening to you. That signals to the doctor that you understand the nuance of your disease.
What if the doctor pushes back? What if they say the labs are fine? The standard guidelines say the dose should be exactly 20 milligrams a day, and they aren't changing it. How do you self-advocate in that moment without ruining the doctor-patient relationship?
That is the hardest part. You have to remember that you are the expert on your lived experience. You can respectfully challenge them by focusing on quality of life. Guidelines published by the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism emphasize that glucocorticoid replacement should be titrated to clinical symptoms, not just lab values. You can remind your doctor of that. Ask them what the treatment goal is. Is it to achieve a perfect number on a lab printout, or is it to get you functional enough to keep your job and care for your family?
That is a powerful reframe. It forces the doctor to look up from the chart and look at the human being sitting in front of them. It also highlights the inherent flaw in the current standard of care. We are trying to replace a dynamic, intelligent system, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which adjusts cortisol levels second by second in response to stress, light, and activity, with a static pill taken 2 or 3 times a day. It is like trying to play a grand piano with a sledgehammer.
That is a great way to put it. Even with the best endocrinologist in the world, replacement therapy is imperfect. The National Institute of General Medical Sciences has extensive data on circadian rhythms, showing how natural cortisol spikes before we even wake up and tapers off perfectly at night. A pill simply cannot do that. That is why patients experience this tug-of-war. The body is constantly searching for a rhythm that the medication cannot provide.
It seems like a lot of the anxiety and self-doubt patients feel comes from the belief that they are doing something wrong, that if they just tweaked their dose perfectly or changed their diet or reduced their stress, they would find this magical equilibrium where they look great and feel great.
And that is the most important message for anyone listening. If you are experiencing this paradox, it is not your fault. It is a biological reality of relying on an artificial replacement for a complex hormone. Acknowledging that the system is flawed takes a lot of the pressure off. You can stop chasing perfection and start focusing on optimization. Maybe you split your doses more frequently throughout the day to mimic the natural curve. Maybe you look into circadian dosing methods or pump therapy, which some researchers and patient advocacy groups are exploring to provide a continuous, adjustable flow of hydrocortisone.
Pump therapy, like an insulin pump for diabetics, but for cortisol. That sounds like a massive step forward for quality of life. But until that becomes the gold standard, patients are stuck navigating this tightrope. They have to manage their doctors almost as much as they manage their disease.
They do, and it is exhausting. Dealing with chronic illness is a full-time job, but going into those appointments prepared, knowing the science behind why your body is sending mixed signals, gives you armor. It protects you from the gaslighting. When a doctor dismisses you, it stings less when you know, objectively, that the biology supports your experience. Your tissues are literally operating on different frequencies.
And knowing that can be incredibly validating. You aren't crazy. Your body isn't broken or defying the laws of physics. It is just responding to a blunt medical instrument in a very localized, complex way. The electricity is in the house, it just isn't reaching all the rooms.
Exactly. And your job, along with a willing and collaborative endocrinologist, is to figure out how to rewire the house as best as you can.
This has been a deeply eye-opening conversation. We took a single concept from a My Adrenal Life article and really unpacked the biological truth behind it. For anyone out there living with adrenal insufficiency, fighting this invisible battle, keep tracking your data, keep speaking up, and don't let anyone tell you that your lived reality isn't valid. If this episode helped you make sense of these mixed signals, share it with a friend who might be navigating their own chronic illness journey.